Digimon Seekers, Chapter 4, Part 9. You're lying. It was both a rejection of the premise and what Kosuke desperately wanted to be true. The bones of the story that had kept him going were cracking. Such a predictable reaction. Ah well, at least it was a useful lie, seeing as it kept you going this long, the professor said, a self-satisfied grin plastered on his face. He relished grinding Kosuke into dust from the inside. If his entire plan ended up going to hell, at least he'd have the pleasure of utterly destroying another man with a few simple words. By the way, that medical facility actually exists. It is also true that Saya, who was in a vegetative state, was transferred to the hospital. No matter how much research I did, the records were perfect. Saya is alive, even at this moment. It's only for the record. What was fake was the footage I showed you from time to time. Mr. Kogata, Eiji raised his voice. I thought I had to talk to him anyway. Look, it's a black Agumon. You are Digimon that SOC has been searching for. Hearing Eiji's words, Kosuke looked at the black Agumon and came to his senses. There it was, the Digimon that would fetch an exceptional reward of 100 million DC. The Digimon Kosuke spent half his life looking for. He was right to establish Operation Tartarus, to crack his way into the source domain in order to find it. He'd chosen a path that led him to success, right up until his mentor hijacked the operation. I don't believe you, Kosuke spat in Professor Ryusenji's direction. I refuse to believe Saya's dead. Not until I've administered this medicine myself, and we see who's right, he said, gripping the syringe in his hand. He walked over to the black Agumon. The Digimon, for its part, looked scared and unsure, but didn't try to flee at the sight of the syringe. Go on. The medicine in that syringe is very real, the professor said, causing Kosuke to hesitate. The black Agumon before you is undoubtedly her partner Digimon. The identification codes match. I've only lied to you about one thing, as I said. Believe what you want about whether or not her body is still in that facility. Are you willing to live with the consequences? What consequences? Kosuke snarled. You're a genius, but you make mistakes under pressure. That medicine will wake up the consciousness of a DMIA victim inside its partner Digimon's Digicore and restore its self-awareness. Suppose you give it to the black Agumon and wake up Saya's consciousness, but it finds it has no body to return to. What becomes of it then? The professor wondered aloud. Kosuke knew exactly where this was headed. He believed her consciousness was still in the black Agumon. He didn't want to believe she'd died in the real world. He hoped against hope for a miracle and knew he was being willfully ignorant of any other outcomes, but he also knew he had to try, regardless of which part of the professor's little speech had been a lie. This is the occult you're dabbling in, Kosuke. If that's what you want, by all means administer the medicine. I will stand by and watch with great interest, the professor continued. Kosuke felt his heart break as the choice overwhelmed him. The syringe clattered to the ground. He felt weak. He couldn't do it. So long as he could cling to the hope that Saya's consciousness was still in there, so long as his only choice was to pray for a miracle rather than be certain, he couldn't administer the shot. But doing so was the only way to know if she'd wake up. He'd either save her or seal her fate. It was too much to bear. The digital world truly can change lives, Professor Ryusenji gloated, as if none of this involved him in the least. Data sector decryption complete. An anguished scream ripped through the air. Doraemon bent over backward, their heads snapping violently backward until they collapsed. The light on its interface gradually went out. Kosuke, what? Forgive me, Doraemon. You deserved better, Kosuke said, and dropped to his knees in front of the Digimon. You had no other choice, did you? We chose the right paths, but they were flawed from the start. I never suspected Ryusenji would be our undoing, and here I thought I'd come to understand humans, if only a little. Doraemon was shockingly sanguine. How kind of you, Doraemon, Professor Ryusenji said, full of sincere love and reverence. What a beautiful resolution to our tale. You all did what you could. Are you trying to console us, Professor, or send us into a rage? You can't just praise kids for doing their best these days, not until you see some results, Kosuke said with a dry laugh. Be that as it may. None of the rest of you knew what Kosuke was going to do once he decrypted the source domain's data, did you? That's very dangerous territory to be in, which is why I should be the one to take this next step, the professor said, returning to the matter at hand. I planned on saying you did it, you know. I was going to give you all the credit. None of that mattered, so long as I found Saya and had a chance to bring her back, Kosuke said quietly. And I appreciate your love for my daughter, the professor said flatly. Kosuke groaned. The heaviness of the past bore down on him, binding him hand and foot, crushing his chest. I'll come up with a story that makes you look good, Kosuke. I really didn't want to lose you, you know, Professor Ryusenji said warmly. Why bother, after all this torture? Kosuke, my prodigy, my right-hand man, I used my vast funds and every connection I had to keep her alive in your mind for as long as I could. If you had found out sooner, you would have drifted off, like a kite cut loose from its string, the professor said, chewing the scenery now. It was all an elaborate troll. Professor Ryusenji was the public face of Abaddon Electronics as its founder, while Kosuke continued working in the shadows as a code cracker. So long as there was hope of reviving Saya, they would always be teacher and student, father and son even. There would always be a little more to extract from Kosuke. And now, you're finished with me. The words of a man who has truly lost everything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must get back to work. Hang in there just a while longer, Ryu, Professor Ryusenji said in Rudemon's direction. Code streamed into the vaccine object from Rudemon's interface. Decrypting vaccine sector. Rudemon began convulsing. Vaccine? Very good. Well, that's enough of this boring talk. Let's get things moving along, shall we? There was no fighting back now. Ryudemon was too injured from the battle on the other side of the gateway, and Yulin had been mind-linked for too long to do anything drastic. Why do any of this, if not to save Saya? Yulin asked pointedly. Was the professor mixed up with some sort of criminal element? She tried to put the pieces together. He couldn't very well just abandon his daughter's body, could he? Assuming he had sent her overseas for treatment, that would only complicate matters if her body did need to be claimed. He could be charged with fraud if he were still receiving insurance payments, but bringing a case like that against a billionaire and public figure would be exceedingly difficult. I told you about the source domain, Kosuke, but what I'm really after is that source Digimon, the professor explained as the decryption continued. What's the source Digimon? Eiji asked. The model digital life form, born at the same time as our world, the seed from which all other AI life forms digivolved. The sacred chalice of the digital world, if you will. Fascinating, isn't it? My heart races just thinking about it. He grew more excited with each passing minute, thinking of all the data he'd get to see in real time. What he went on to describe sounded like the stem cells of the digital world, a Digimon that was nothing in its current form, but capable of becoming anything. Contact with real-world data, however, caused it to give birth to several new kinds of Digimon. The prototype Digimon were among them. The most dangerous of these were sealed off in a new system within the digital world, but the source Digimon kept receiving outside data. Though the source Digimon itself had not taken any particular form, it was undoubtedly the engine fueling endless digivolutions. I'm warning you, it's too dangerous, Yulin said sharply. She'd heard enough. This had to stop. You're quite right. I have no idea how dangerous this source Digimon might prove to be. That's why we have to leave it alone. It's too much for one person to handle, let alone all of humanity. Interfering with the source Digimon raised numerous ethical, philosophical, and religious quandaries. It needed to be bound by law, like cloning tech did so many years ago. Interfering with the source Digimon could give one the ability to create Digimon at will. I know. I happen to agree with you even. Nevertheless, Ryusenji hesitated. Yulin knew what he was going to say next. You know how I loathe boredom. Think of it. I'll never be bored again. The scientist's curiosity knew no bounds, but Yulin never imagined he would go so far as to use his daughter's death and betray his own students to satisfy it. If this is who you truly are, Professor, you've lost whatever shred of respect I had for you. Have I ever been the type to care what others thought of me, Yulin? Maybe the failure of the Tartarus program had changed him after all, or simply unleashed something that was always there, spurred on by the loss of his daughter and Yulin's departure. My ultimate goal is to contact the source Digimon, communicate with it, become one with it. Yes, that's right. I am going to mind link with the source Digimon. He intended to become the human overseer of the digital world. You traitor, Eiji shouted. Eiji couldn't stand it any longer. I beg your pardon? This is a betrayal. The SOC and DDL were joined at the hip, thanks to Kosuke and Professor Ryusenji's cooperation behind the scenes. The plan to break into the source domain was the professor's all along. for reasons all his own. His end goal was to mind link with the source Digimon, to control it. You want to take the most powerful partner Digimon in the digital world for yourself. Well, it sounds lovely when you put it like that, but remind me exactly how I betrayed you, the professor challenged. You didn't, Eiji said, his mind on the still restrained Lugumon. I see. Good talk, the professor said with a nod. You offered me the job in the hopes I'd digivolve Lugumon to their ultimate form, right? Why else would a famous professor bother with a kid like me? The prototype Digimon must digivolve to their ultimate form in order to make full use of the interfaces on their heads. Yes. But that Berserker Hello Garmin form simply wouldn't do. The Mind Linker must maintain complete control with the tools available to them. Eiji's infiltration into the SOC had been a test to get Lugumon to digivolve. That much I follow. Your charisma won me over when we first met. I thought it was the chance of a lifetime. I thought I'd finally found something worth fighting for. I was determined to use your fame and power to raise my own profile in the digital world. I was going to turn my life around through my work as a code cracker, but I've grown since we first met. Eiji was no longer the A-class code cracker the professor hired. He was S-class now. I apologize for not filling you in sooner, but you know how it is, the professor purred. D4, classified. Yes, and your unfortunate circumstances, no living relations, for example, made you the ideal candidate. You mean I was convenient? Well, your DS values with Lugumon were certainly what sealed it for me. And had I told you everything, well, neither you nor Lugumon would have grown at all, as you put it. If you say so. Eiji and Lugumon learned in time to focus and take things as they came, to believe in their own potential, and never do anything by half measures. They'd thought, worried, cried, celebrated, and puked with every fiber of their beings. They'd hit rock bottom and clawed their way back up together. Maybe it was true that they wouldn't have grown as much as they had if the professor had been more hands-on, or if they had more information that gave them a sense of security. That felt like a lie, though. See, you get it. You know where you stand, so why are you sharing the righteous indignation of these two? They have nothing to do with you. Unless, is it sympathy? Why? Eiji asked, anger rising within him. You know why. Do you ever just shut up, Rusenji? Lugumon roared, rising to their feet in defiance of their bonds. We're losing our minds just listening to you rattle on. Their fur stood on end. Why? Professor Ryusenji asked, puzzlement screwing up his face. You said something when you were talking about finding our friend, Pulsemon, that it was just a fraction of what the source domain's data sector could do. Eiji was furious that the professor showed no regard for the safety of his DMIA pupil, Leon Alexander. You know how I loathe boredom. The phrase had been rattling around in Eiji's skull the moment the professor said it. He felt compelled to throw it back at him. Oh, the boredom comment was merely a figure of speech, Eiji, the professor demurred. You were watching when we fought Kazuchimon, and Lugumon turned into Hello Garmin. You could have stepped in and stopped it, but you didn't. The course of the Digivolution mattered more than Leon's life. Rather, it was more interesting, academically speaking. Leon was a pawn, a means to an end. The professor raised his eyebrows. Aha! You're mad on Leon's behalf. You two were quite close, weren't you? He's your student, Eiji lashed out. He couldn't believe he'd ever respected the professor. You keep talking without saying anything, Rusenji. Have you ever taken a good hard look at yourself? Lugumon pressed. Keep barking, you mangy stray. Now, Eiji. I'm on their side, Eiji interjected, cutting the professor off. You were living a dead-end life when I found you. Is this how you betray my expectations of you? The professor countered. You're betraying me right now. Perhaps so. I wanted to be you at the start of all this. Now I want nothing to do with you. I overlooked your faults because I respected you, but I'm going to remember them for the rest of my life and think about what a sour little man you are, Eiji seethed. You don't feel guilt, Yulin added. He had no guilt, no conscience, no empathy, nor could he see his own shortcomings. He craved stimulus. Results were everything. Anything else was a means to an end. That's what draws people to you, your confident, shameless lies. You're a sociopath. Geez, squad leader, I wasn't going to go quite that far. Eiji couldn't help but recoil from such a bold armchair diagnosis. The professor stopped what he was doing, unable to concentrate. Point is, we don't believe a word you say anymore. You're lower than a Sukamon and twice as smelly, Lugumon said, spoiling for a fight. So you hate me now. Ryusenji's shoulders slumped. Hearing it from a Digimon hurt worse. You betrayed Leon, Old Man Tartarus, and the Digi-Police lady. And as much as you might try to hide it, one day you're gonna turn on me and AG too. I just know it. Is that what you think of me, Lugumon? It's what I know. Anyone who would use their own daughter's death for their own benefit couldn't be trusted. Professor Ryusenji sighed. This was most uncomfortable. I put my trust in you, I catered to you, and now you would betray me. Goodness. Well, I suppose this next part will go far more smoothly if I do it myself anyhow. AG touched Lugumon's interface. Invisible code flew between them. Partner commands. Alone, you say? This was the end of the road. It was time to say goodbye. AG felt like he'd been living a dream, but he could see the door was closing on that life. Once AG settled on his feelings toward Ryusenji, he felt a massive amount of energy welling up within Lugumon. Their inextinguishable magic flame burned bright once more. AG heard the chains holding Lugumon screech and groan. They were in lockstep once again. Well, Leon, you see, he knew too much, Professor Ryusenji said, looking at the Pulsemon where Leon's consciousness ostensibly lay dormant. He knew what my little lie was, and he got a little too powerful. He became a risk, the professor lamented with a frown. That doesn't look like a performance. You're actually sad about it, AG said. You have to nip it in the bud, you see. I've done it countless times. With Leon, of course, but also with Kosuke here. AG was always too busy with his own problems to think about judging anyone else. He and Lugumon called out to one another over the connection and reaffirmed their desire to save their friends. They were a team, and there was but one path in front of them. Their hearts became one, and Lugumon burst free of the restraint tool. Bits of chain flew through the air as Professor Ryusenji spun around, eyes wide with shock. How did you break the restraint so quickly? I've got hellfire in my veins. The moment my body feels any sort of foreign object, I can generate enough heat to burn through it, Lugumon said, head held high. Their fur once again stood on end as a flaming aura enveloped their body. Now listen here, mad scientist. You don't get to use people however you want. Lugumon let out a howl. They were determined to protect their pack from this enemy. Mad scientist, goodness, that hurts, Lugumon. You sure do know how to push my buttons. Eh? Looks like I've gone and given myself another to-do before finishing the decryption. You'll just have to wait a little longer, Ryu buddy, Professor Ryusenji said as he paused the vaccine sector decryption. This isn't going to end well for you, AG said as he readied his Digimon linker, hellfire bobbing and flickering on its screen. End of Chapter 4, Part 9.